أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Dear viewers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I welcome you
وعلیکم
all to the national discussion program organized by the Department of Tarbiyat, Majlis Ansarullah UK. The topic of discussion is dangers of social media. We will start the program with the recitation of the Holy Quran, and I request Mr. Ahmad Tariq Mubashir to recite a portion from the Holy Quran with English translation.
السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ۔ اعوذ باللہ من الشیطان الرجیم، بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم۔ یا ایہا الذین آمنوا يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتبعوا خطوات الشيطان، ومن يتبع خطوات الشيطان فإنه يأمر بالفحشاء والمنكر، ولولا فضل الله عليكم ورحمته ما زكى منكم من أحد أبدا، ولكن الله يزكي من يشاء، والله سميع عليم. The portion of the Holy Quran just recited before you is from Surah An-Nur, chapter 24, verse 22. The English translation is as follows: I seek refuge with Allah from Satan, the accursed. In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful. O ye who believe, follow not the footsteps of Satan, and whoso follows the footsteps of Satan should know that he surely enjoins immorality and manifest evil. And but for the grace of Allah and His mercy upon you, not one of you would ever be pure, but Allah purifies whom He pleases, and Allah is all hearing, all knowing. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah. Now I would like to invite Mr. Rashid Ahmad Mirza to recite a poem from Kalame Mahmud of Hazrat Mirza Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmad, Khalifatul Masih II, Raziyallahu anhu.
السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ۔
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
کلام حضرت خلیفۃ المسیح الثانی رضی اللہ تعالیٰ عنہ۔ لان جماعت مجھے کچھ کہنا ہے، لان جماعت مجھے کچھ کہنا ہے، پر ہے یہ شرط کے ضائع میرا پیغام نہ ہو، پر ہے یہ شرط کے ضائع میرا پیغام نہ چند نسائے تم کو چاہتا ہوں کہ کروں چند نسائے تم کو تاکہ پھر بعد میں مجھ پر کوئی الزام نہ ہو تاکہ پھر بعد میں مجھ پر کوئی الزام نہ ہو جب گزر جائیں گے ہم تم پہ پڑے گا سب بار جب گزر جائیں گے ہم تم پہ پڑے گا سب بار سستیاں ترک کرو طالب آرام نہ ہو سستیاں ترک کرو طالب آرام نہ ہو خدمت دین کو ایک فضل الہی جانو خدمت دین کو ایک فضل الہی جانو اس کے بدلے میں کبھی طالب انعام نہ ہو اس کے بدلے میں کبھی طالب انعام نہ ہو دل میں ہو سوز تو آنکھوں سے رواں آنسو دل میں ہو سوز تو آنکھوں سے رواں آنسو تمہیں اس لام کہو مغز فقط نام نہ ہو تمہیں اس لام کہو مغز فقط نام نہ ہو رغبت دل سے ہو پابند نماز و روزہ رغبت دل سے ہو پابند نماز و روزہ نظر انداز کوئی سائے احکام نہ ہو نظر انداز کوئی سائے احکام نہ ہو پر ہے یہ شرط کے ضائع میرا پیغام نہ ہو.
Jazakallah. Nicely recited. Now Mr. Muhammad Usama would read out the English translation of the recited poem.
Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The translation of this nazm is that, O children of the community, I have something to say, but the condition is that my message should not be lost. I want to give you a few words of advice so that no blame falls upon me later on. When we have passed away, the entire burden would fall upon you. Give up your slothfulness. Do not become seekers of comfort. Consider the service of faith as a blessing from God. Never be the seekers of recompense in exchange for it. There should be passion in the heart. The eyes should be shedding tears. You should possess the spirit of Islam, not just a name. Be duteous unto prayers and fast. No part of the injunctions should be overlooked. Inshallah.
Jazakallah. The Department of Tarbiyat, Majlis Ansarullah UK is holding this discussion on dangers of social media as per the instruction of Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad, Khalifatul Masih the Fifth. May Allah be his helper. Our beloved Hazur, may Allah be his helper, has delivered a series of sermons, addresses, messages, and held question and answer on this very important topic. Now we will be watching a clip of virtual meeting in which our beloved Hazur, may Allah be his helper, pointed out the ways of training for children.
Members sought Hazur's guidance on how to prevent children wasting time on online games and the internet.
بات یہ ہے کہ اب تو جو سائنسدان اور ڈاکٹر ہیں یہ بھی کہتے ہیں کہ بچوں کی نظریں خراب ہوتی ہیں، ان کی سوچوں پہ اثر پڑتا ہے، اس لیے بچوں کو انٹرنیٹ اور گیموں پہ اور ٹی وی پہ 1 گھنٹے سے زیادہ 24 گھنٹے میں نہیں بیٹھنے دینا چاہیے. لیکن آج کل کیونکہ اسکول بند ہو جاتے ہیں کرونا کی وجہ سے، پڑھائیاں بھی بند ہیں، تو انٹرنیٹ پہ بھی آن لائن پڑھائیاں زیادہ ہو رہی ہیں. لیکن بہرحال پھر بھی اس قسم کی جو گیمیں ہیں نا جو وقت ضائع کرنے والی ہیں، اور پھر وقت ضائع کرنے والی نہیں بلکہ پیسہ ضائع کرنے والی بھی ہیں. اس پہ آپ پیسے دے کے تو گیم کو خریدتے ہیں، اور پھر گیم کی کا جس طرح نشے کا عادی انسان ہو جاتا ہے، اس طرح گیموں کا بھی عادت پڑ جاتی ہے ان کو کھیلنے کی، اس کے بغیر ان کا گزارا ہی نہیں ہوتا. ان گیموں کے دوران بچوں کی جو گیمز ہوتی ہیں ان کے دوران غلط قسم کی جنسی بے راہ روی کی باتیں بھی بیچ میں اشتہار کے طور پہ ڈال دیتے ہیں، اور وہ جب اشتہار سامنے آتے ہیں گیم کھیلتے کھیلتے تو بچپن سے ہی بچوں کے دماغ جو ہیں وہ زہر آلود ہو رہے ہوتے ہیں ان گندی باتوں سے، اور بڑے ہو کے پھر وہ ایک اور نہج پہ چل پڑتے ہیں. اس لیے ایک تو یہ ہے کہ ماں باپ کو یہ توجہ رکھنی چاہیے کہ بچے جو بھی گیم کھیل رہے ہیں یا پروگرام جو بھی دیکھ رہے ہیں انٹرنیٹ پہ یا ٹی وی پہ وہ کون سا ہے، اور اس کی نگرانی رکھیں. اور پھر یہ نگرانی رکھیں کہ ایک خاص وقت معین ہے، اس وقت معین کے علاوہ تم نے نہیں دیکھنا. ان کو بتائیں، ان کو سمجھائیں کہ تمہاری نظر خراب ہو جائے گی، تمہاری سوچوں پہ فرق پڑے گا، اس لیے بہتر ہے کہ تم کتابیں پڑھو اس کی جگہ. جو برین کی ڈیولپمنٹ کے لیے زیادہ بہتر ہے. اور اس کے علاوہ ان کے لیے متبادل پروگرام بنائیں، ان سے بیٹھیں، ان سے ڈسکشن کریں، ان سے باتیں کریں. ان کو اچھے پروگرام، دوسرے ایسے پروگرام اگر بہت ہی زیادہ زور دیتے ہیں تو پھر انٹرنیٹ پہ یا ٹی وی پہ ان کو ایسے پروگرام دکھانے کی کوشش کریں جس سے ان کی علمی قابلیت بھی بڑھے اور روحانی لحاظ سے وہ بہتر ہوں اور عقل کا جو معیار ہے وہ بھی بلند ہو. تو یہ چیزیں تو کرنی پڑیں گی اس لیے. لیکن بہرحال یہ بہت ضروری ہے کہ ماں باپ نظر رکھیں کہ بچے کیا دیکھ رہے ہیں. اگر ماں باپ پڑھے لکھے نہیں ہیں اور بچے پڑھ رہے ہیں اور وہ اپنی گیموں میں بیٹھ کے اپنے آپ کو انوالو کر رہے ہیں اور ماں باپ کوئی پرواہ نہیں کر رہے ہیں، ان کو اپنے مسائل کی فکر ہے، تو اس طرح آپ اپنی اولاد کو ضائع کر دیں گے. اس لیے اس طرف بہت احتیاط کی ضرورت ہے اور اس کے لیے بہت کوشش اور محنت کی ضرورت ہے. لیکن یہ بہرحال نگرانی کرنی پڑے گی. تھوڑی سی سختی بھی بعض دفعہ کرنی پڑتی ہے بچوں پہ اس لحاظ سے، تو لیکن مار دھاڑ سے نہیں، پیار سے سمجھائیں اور ان کو بتائیں کہ یہ تمہارا معین وقت ہے اور یہ پروگرام ہے. اور بعض ایسے پروگرام جس پہ خطرہ ہو کہ بےہودہ قسم کے اشتہار بھی آ سکتے ہیں، ان کو ویسے ہی بلاک کر دینا چاہیے، وہ آپ کے انٹرنیٹ پہ آئیں نہ. لیکن گیموں کے لیے بھی ایک معین وقت ہونا چاہیے. ہاں، صحت کے لیے باہر جا کے ان سے کہیں تم فٹ بال کھیلو، کرکٹ کھیلو اور کوئی گیم ہیں وہ کھیلو باہر، لیکن ٹی وی پہ بیٹھ کے اپنے ذہن کو خراب نہ کرو. اس کے 1 گھنٹے سے زیادہ تمہیں دیکھنے کی اجازت نہیں ہے. زیادہ سختی بھی نہیں کر سکتے کیونکہ آج کل کے معاشرے میں سختی کریں تب بھی بچے بگڑ جاتے ہیں. لیکن پھر بھی ایک پیار سے سمجھانا اور خود ذاتی تعلق بچوں سے پیدا کرنا کہ بچے آپ کو دوست سمجھیں ماں باپ کو اپنا، اس سے تربیت کے بہتر ذرائع پیدا ہو سکتے ہیں. ٹھیک ہے، محنت کرنی پڑے گی ماں باپ کو. اصل چیز ماں باپ کی محنت ہے. بچے پیدا کیے ہیں تو اب اس پہ محنت کر کے ان کو سنبھالنا بھی ہے.
May Allah enable us to follow our beloved Hazur's instruction properly, and may we excel in service and become strong helpers of the Khalifa of the time and proud progeny of Islam and Ahmadiyyat. Ameen. Our keynote speaker for today's discussion is Mr. Qasid Muin Ahmad, who is a Waqf now. Mr. Qasid entered in Jamia Ahmadiyya UK in 2006 and graduated in 2013. After completion his education from Jamia Ahmadiyya UK, he spent time as a missionary in Ghana, Spain, and Rabwa before being posted in MTA Programming Department in 2014. He has been serving as editor of the weekly Al-Hakam newspaper since March 2018. Now I would like to invite Mr. Qasid Muin to speak on the topic, which is dangers of social media. Jazakallah.
السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ. اشہد ان لا الہ الا اللہ وحدہ لا شریک لہ واشہد ان محمدا عبدہ ورسولہ. اما بعد فاعوذ باللہ من الشیطان الرجیم. بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم. We're all very familiar with the term social media. I'm sure the Ansar here, perhaps some of you know even more than me, what exactly the dangers are of social media. But we can all learn from each other, and I would encourage the Ansar. I believe there are some questions after this talk that I have. So if any of the Ansar brothers wish to contribute to this, to what I have to say, because what I say will not necessarily be conclusive in the sense that social media is still a danger that is still new to the world. And having said that, there are a lot of aspects that perhaps I may not be able to touch on. So if you do feel that you can contribute, please do. And I'm sure the team afterwards will compile any sort of contributions you'd like to make, and then they will later on address those issues as well. But like I said, we're all very familiar with social media and exactly what that entails. And there are many platforms of social media. I mean, for example, just to list a few, you've got Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, WhatsApp, and the list goes on. There is just so much out there, so much choice. And at the face of it, everything may seem very similar in the sense that, everything may seem very different in the sense that everything seems to have a specific exclusive purpose. And the interfaces may obviously be different, but they all have one goal. And the goal is for each and every one of us to bear everything in front of the world, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, when talking about the harms of social media, if you address it head on, some of the harms that come to light are mental health issues. So, for example, we have the younger generation who, or even the older generations, in fact, who are struggling with mental health as a result of social media. And that those mental health issues have led to depression, loneliness, anxiety, and it's gotten to the point where it's even resulted in self-harm and suicide, or suicide. And it's a frightening and alarming state in the world right now that, there are multiple studies have been done and proven the link, the direct link between social media use and suicide rates and self-harm rates. So this is something which, it's not just inconclusive. This is very conclusive. This is something which is proven, and it's something that the world is quite frankly concerned about. So you've got mental health issues, and then you've got self-harming and suicide issues as well, because of what social media can lead to, and I'll come to that a bit shortly. Then you've got fake news. Fake news is something I'm sure we can all relate to. Fake news, basically, in essence, it means forwarding and passing on information which has not been ascertained whether it's accurate, whether it's credible or authentic, and it's just being passed on and forwarded to another 12 to 50 contacts, and then there's a vicious cycle of fake news just getting out there. So a recent example of this is in the time of coronavirus, and how at the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, there was, and even still there is, a lot of controversy to do with how the COVID-19 pandemic is a farce, and that it isn't genuine, and that it's something that the governments have perhaps made up, or they're passing it on to members of the public. And unfortunately, this led to a lot of deaths. Whether or not it was directly linked with the fake news, that's another thing. But regardless, this fake news does unfortunately get out there. It does have an impact on people. Conspiracy theories are spread through fake news. And there is just so much that, unfortunately, I think, we can all relate to this, where we are sent on a regular basis on WhatsApp, some sort of a quote or something research-based, medical news or something, and we take it, but sometimes we don't really ponder over its authenticity, whether it's accurate information, and we blindly sometimes pass that information on, but where in fact the onus is on us to actually be responsible for ensuring that that information is accurate. Are we considering the fact that this information, we don't even know if this is accurate or not, and yet we're passing it on blindly to other people without thinking of the consequences? Yes, of course, the consequences may not be as dire as mental health issues, but still, there is a responsibility on each and every one of us to ponder over, this sort of harm of social media and spreading news that is not necessarily genuine. Then you've got elements of political turmoil, which has turned up in recent times. So, for instance, if you take a look at the United States government and how social media had a big impact on the elections at the time of, I believe it was when Joe Biden was elected, or if not before that, I believe. At the time, there was so much polarization within the country that it led to riots, mass riots, and it almost led to civil war. And experts now talk of how social media can lead to, one day, perhaps, if it does go very sour and ugly, to civil war. Which country it may be, that's not decided yet, but it is not just the USA that has suffered from this. There are various countries, for example, Brazil and France and various other countries in their election times who, as a result of the influence and pressure of social media, and I think brainwashing maybe is perhaps an extreme word, but in some ways I may be correct in using that word. That the social media users were so brainwashed with fake news or exaggerated news, if you like, that it led to people getting out on the streets, and the polarization between the right and left became even more. The gulf increased so much more than what it was before. And so this is something which is a big concern to the world right now. Now, social media is a result of the technological advancement that we are all, witnesses of. There is no denying that technology has advanced at a substantial, at a remarkable rate. Now, since the 1950s, generally, if you see, in terms of science, there has been a lot of progress. Especially, if you go back to the time of the Promised Messiah, but more recently, if you go back to 1950, for example, if you look at the car. The car is, a vehicle that has, in the 1950s, if it could go at a certain speed, now perhaps, we've increased by double that speed. So that's one example. But when you look at technology and when you look at computer processing, and you see the immense growth, the sheer growth of computer processing, it is exponential. They say that we have increased in terms of from the 1950s up until now, we've increased in computer processing speed trillions of times. So that's trillions percent. So if we look at the car, that's increased 100% in terms of speed, but computer processing speed has increased trillions of times over. That is a remarkable amount of growth. And that obviously, has led to a lot of people asking when robots will take over, robots or computers will take over. But the fact is, coming to reality, that science, or rather computer processing, has exceptional powers. And the people on the back end in Silicon Valley, they have a lot of power when it comes to our lives, our data, and what we post and what we share with those platforms. Like I said, this generation, or Gen Z as it's called, and Generation Z is basically that generation that was born between the late 90s and the early 2010s. This generation is, unfortunately, and it is a reality, that these are the guinea pigs. These are the lab rats who are being experimented on. And time will tell exactly what harms come out of extensive social media use. From a young age, unfortunately, we see 8-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 6-year-olds even. I'm sure that, even younger than that, up until the late teens. And we see a big problem of people, of these youngsters, in their vulnerability. They believe that they're doing what they know is best for them, sharing their life, posting pictures, posting comments, and sharing their views with the world. But what's happening is that these, the adverse effects of that are now coming to light. And it's something which is very alarming, but I'm sure even more research is needed in this respect, in terms of science, in terms of mental health, in terms of the physical and mental toll it takes on these youngsters later on, and how they lead their lives later on. So, the crux is that this generation is, just a science experiment right now. And that's an unfortunate truth. Hazrat Khalifatul Masih V, Ayyadahullah Ta'ala bin Nasr al-Aziz, has time and again, warned us of the harms of social media since the very beginning. He warned us of, for example, he told us about Facebook. He said that the owner of Facebook, the founder of Facebook, his ethos, he declared openly that he wants its users to bear themselves openly, bear themselves, whatever they are inside, whatever they are, whatever they believe in, whatever they do, share pictures and put themselves out there, the good, the bad, and the ugly for the world to judge. This is something which Hazur warned us of and said that this is, and at another place, someone asked Hazur about, explaining this a bit more regarding Facebook and social media. And Hazur said, I can get my work done without using Facebook, without using social media. If you feel that you can't get your work done, then so be it. Then you're free to use it. But at the same time, you need to bear in mind the negative repercussions. Now, as for the solutions, inshallah, I'll come to that a bit later on. Now, having said that, I've given a bit of a morbid sort of a grim sort of outlook on social media. But the fact is that social media does have its advantages, and obviously, for obvious reasons, people do use social media, widely use social media. For example, bringing friends together, bringing old relatives together, people who haven't met for a long time, bringing them together. And that's, a positive aspect of social media. Tabligh is something that we conduct on social media, and it's very useful in terms of, getting news out there and sharing information, authentic information as regards the Jamaat activities and Hazur's engagements, etc. But the fact is that we need to remember that it isn't technology. It's not technology per se that is the biggest threat. Technology isn't the threat. The fact is that technology has the ability, and we're seeing it, it has the ability to bring out the worst of humans. And that worst of humans is what is the actual threat, and what has been termed as now an existential threat, a threat to our own existence. Now, I will read out a few extracts of Hazrat Khalifatul Masih the fifth, Ayyadahullah Ta'ala bin Nasr al-Aziz, regarding social media, because it's important to touch base, it's important to understand what Hazur has said, and see from a central perspective, a Markazi perspective, how Hazur sees social media. Regarding children with phones, Hazur once said, there is a widespread problem here of children demanding from their parents to buy them mobile phones. Some are just 10 years of age and say that they should have a mobile phone. They demand that they should, have a mobile phone. Are you doing some sort of business? Hazur is asking those children, are you doing some sort of business? Or are you doing some kind of work in which information is required to be accessed every minute? When asked, they reply, we need to call our parents. Hazur says, if your parents are not worried, then there is also no need for you to worry, because phones can also lead to bad habits. Now, it's a fact that at a young age, it is strongly discouraged for children to be using social media. The age range that is given for people to start using social media is around 18. Maybe some people say 16. But I mean, there is no hard and fast rule. There's no medical rule. And I'm sure in later years we may see some medical, age restriction on the use of social media. Because I personally believe that there should be. Whether it comes about or not, that's a separate issue. But social media should not be openly, explicitly just given into the hands of a 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, and then for them to expect to know how to use it. Yes, it seems very easy, it seems very straightforward, but the fact is that there are a lot more repercussions to social media, a lot more complicated consequences to social media than what meets the eye. Then Hazur talks about mixing of girls and boys on social media. Hazur says, these days text messages are sent using mobile phones. It offers a very inexpensive way to waste time in frivolity and talking with those who are not mahram, i.e. those people whose non-marriageable relatives according to Islam. Very casually it is said, it was only a text message. It's not like we're talking. Hazur says contacts are developed with others when a girl's female friend gives the phone number of a male friend of hers, or contact numbers are exchanged in some way or another, and text messages start getting exchanged over the phone. Ahmadi girls should stay away from these things, and likewise, the Ahmadi men listening to this should also safeguard themselves from this. Then regarding the harms of social media and how they're becoming a lot more manifest now. Hazur says, these days, many ills are developing through social media use. Young boys and girls sitting in front of their parents are silently chatting where pictures and messages are being exchanged. New accounts are being created in new programs, and the entire day is wasted on the phone, iPad, or computer, etc. This leads to worsening of morals and gives rise to irritability in character, and the children quickly become out of control. Hazur says, this leads to worsening of morals and gives rise to irritability in character, and the children quickly become out of control. All these matters need attention, and there is a need to impose limits. For this, you will need to think about creating alternative means of occupying them. Now, this is obviously, one way which Hazur has instructed Ansarullah to understand exactly what sort of an enemy we're dealing with here when it comes to social media, because social media is an enemy. It's lurked into our homes, and where its pros are, its cons are now becoming apparent. Unfortunately, we've seen time and again of families struggling to cope with, mental health issues or behavioral issues. Hazur refers to irritability here in character. This is something which has occurred in families in the Jamaat, within the Jamaat. And Hazur has referred to this, and this is a problem which is being tackled. And, inshallah, we pray that this is something that we can overcome. But it requires effort. And in the video that you've just heard, Hazur has said that parents will need to make an effort. It's not something that you can just take idly. It's a new challenge. It's a big challenge that we must overcome. And it's something that we really need to get our heads around quickly to be able to do something effective. Then Hazur, regarding becoming trendsetters instead of, blindly following the world and becoming trendsetters, Hazur says, we Ahmadis should remember that the world is going through a dangerous time. Satan is aggressively striking from all directions, and if Muslims, and especially Ahmadi Muslim men, women, and youth, do not try to uphold their religious values, then there is no guarantee of our future. We will be held accountable by God the Almighty more than others because we understood the truth that the promised Messiah explained to us, yet we did not act upon it. Thus, if we want to save ourselves from destruction, then it is imperative to live in this world while adopting every Islamic teaching with full confidence. Thus, in such a situation, under human compassion, we have to show the people living in the progressive world the right path and save them instead of adopting their colors. Their reformation seems to be difficult due to their arrogance and distance from religion. If they do not reform themselves, then the future progress of the world will be led by those nations who keep the religious and moral values intact. Hazur emphasizes that we must not forget our responsibility. We must not just fall into the trap that the world has given to us and easily just blindly follow what the world gives to us. So social media, yes, it does have its pros, but its cons are not, invisible anymore. They're becoming more apparent. And the fact is that the younger generation are learning from our elders. The older generation, it's their practices on social media that are now being exaggerated a little bit more, just a little bit, just a tiny bit more by the next generation. And this is a trickle-down effect that will unfortunately, if we don't put a stop to, or if we don't put some sort of regulations by ourselves in terms of social media use, then this can lead to something very detrimental. Because one generation does it, the next generation does it a bit more, and then the next generation pushes its limits even further. And this is unfortunately an ongoing cycle that we can learn from human history and human psychology. Regarding the sanctity of photographs of Khulafa, and this is something that is very important as well, Hazur says, Hazrat Muslim Maud Razillah Ta'ala Anhu narrated an incident when the promised Messiah had his photograph taken. However, when a postcard was presented to him, which had his photo on it, he said that this could not be allowed. He instructed the community that no one should purchase those cards, and as a result, no one dared to repeat this. These days, however, I have noticed on some tweets and on WhatsApp that some people are trying to circulate that old postcard. They have either acquired it from an elder or purchased it from a shop that sells old books. This is wrong and should be stopped. The promised Messiah ﷺ, this is important now what Hazur is saying, he says, the promised Messiah ﷺ had his photograph taken so that people from far off places, especially Europeans, who could judge a character from facial characteristics would see it and it would lead them to seek the truth. However, when the Promised Messiah ﷺ saw that people may turn this into a business and sell his photograph on postcards, he felt this may become a source of harmful innovation, and he strictly forbade it. In some instances, he asked for the postcards to be destroyed. People who have businesses selling photographs and charge exorbitant prices should pay attention to the matter. Some colorized photographs of the Promised Messiah, even though no color photograph of him exists. This is completely wrong and should also be avoided. Also, incorrect use of photographs of Khulafa should be avoided. Now, on social media, it's also important to remember that when in life we don't do certain things, then we shouldn't be doing those things on social media either. So, for example, it's often seen that people post photos of, their mulaqat with Hazur, and this is becoming now a trend. But posting your photo of Hazur, of a mulaqat with Hazur, it can come under the aspect of, although the intention might be pure, but the fact is that this can lead to then other things, and this is something you wouldn't do in real life. You wouldn't go around showing people, random people who you've never met in your life. Oh, look at this. This is a photo of me and Hazur. Look at this. Going around some sort of congregation and saying, this is a photo of me and Hazur. When you wouldn't do this in real life, don't do it in social media. For example, we wouldn't, blindly start talking to a person of the opposite sex on the streets, in a mosque environment, just blindly, start chatting to them. So on social media, we shouldn't be doing those things either with someone who is non-mahram. Unless it's a relative, that's a separate thing. So these things, we need to bear in mind that what we won't do in real life, we shouldn't do that on social media either. There needs to be some sort of consistency of our lives, because when inconsistencies arise, that is where a problem arises as well. Inconsistency, I mean, between our real life and our life on social media, because that is a virtual life that we're living, and we need to avoid that becoming a virtual life and that remaining part of our lives. Now, in conclusion, the fact is that social media isn't going anywhere. Social media is here to stay. And as much as we want social media to disappear, it doesn't seem like it will. So many people, too many people, have profited from it and are profiting from it. And it's just something that we're just going to have to learn to regulate our lives around it. Some of which, I've mentioned on how to do those things. Of course, there is no hard and fast rule. We're all still learning. Like I said at the beginning, I'm not exactly an entire expert on how social media can be solved. How we can solve this problem of social media, but it's something that we all are in together, and we all must overcome somehow. There's a famous saying regarding social media. It says that there are only two industries in the world that call their customers users: illegal drugs and software. And this, we should take a moment to just reflect on the gravity of this statement, that social media is effectively a drug. Hazur has also referred to games and how boys and girls, when they're playing on games consoles like PlayStation, Xbox, and what have you, then they are addicted. Similarly, teenagers, younger children, and the older generations as well, even people my age and older than me, are in fact addicted. Some people are addicted to social media, and they get a dopamine hit from social media just as they would from something like cannabis or crack cocaine. And it gives them the same buzz, and those same, I believe, their neurons, brain neurons, are ignited just as they are whilst using social media and whilst using illegal substances. So this is something that we really need to ponder over, and something that we really need to reflect, that if it's becoming an addiction, like anything in Islam, Islam says that there should be moderation in every aspect of our lives. If there isn't moderation in anything, especially social media, then we need to really regulate ourselves and try to discipline ourselves. We all, by the grace and blessings of Allah, know what is right and wrong. The Holy Quran has taught us many things. In principle, in essence, we all are born on Deen Fitrat. We have a certain nature where we know right from wrong. This is something which also the Holy Quran has explained. And the fact is that, the very first hadith is innamal a'malu binniyat, that deeds are judged by intentions. What intention are we using social media for? That is something that we all must ask ourselves. Why are we using social media? Hazur said that he can live without it. His work gets done, and his obviously job is one of the most important job in the world. He can do his job without the use of social media. Can we? Yes, I understand, and we all understand that yes, social media sometimes does have its benefits, and sometimes you do need to resort to social media. But why are we using it? That's something that we all need to ask ourselves. Now, we also need to remember that when our sons and daughters post pictures of themselves on social media, or compare themselves to others, or post their opinions, on Twitter, and in the hope that perhaps they're going to get some positive reinforcement, we must remember that we were designed, as human beings, we were designed to care about those people around us, the family members, immediate neighbors, and the local populace, and relatives, wherever they may be. We were designed to care about what they think of us, but we have not been designed to take into consideration what thousands of people around the world, not just people, strangers, what they think about us. We have not been designed that way. We can't take that information. It's brutal. And only with, immense training can you take that burden of, having or be judged by people who are strangers, frankly, and who don't know you. Thousands of people like that. Now, the practice of likes, the practice of thumbs up, retweets, and positive reinforcement, we need to remember that it doesn't give accurate information. That is a very temporary, short-term, short-lived assessment of a opinion that you share, or of a photograph that you share, or and that is another thing. We should also be thinking about whether we need to really post photographs of ourselves, selfies of ourselves. Where Hazur has limited the Ahmadi ladies from posting selfies or pictures of themselves, then it does become a responsibility of men also to not push those boundaries and start taking selfies every single day and posting everything about themselves. There needs to be some form of consistency between the men and women. Yes, okay, there isn't that much strictness in terms of men, in terms of, I would say, wearing a headscarf, for example. We don't have to do that. But there needs to be some form of haya. There needs to be some form of modesty, which we adhere to. Is it really necessary for us to be posting pictures of ourselves on a regular basis? Where it's necessary, we all know when it's necessary. We all know those circumstances that we really do need to post pictures of ourselves. Where we don't, there is no point. There is no need. And, it just comes under the category of vain, frankly, which the Holy Quran has told us to steer clear of. I was talking about this whole aspect of retweeting, likes, thumbs up, getting positive reinforcement, or attempting to try and get positive reinforcement from people outside. But the fact is that even if we do, it's short-lived, and whatever negative outcome comes of that, that is also short-lived, and that's also short-term. But the harms it has on our mental state are long-term. It leaves us feeling low. It leaves us feeling lonely. It leaves us feeling anxious, depressed, and it can make us want to do those things all over again, and it becomes a vicious cycle. Sometimes we get that positive reinforcement, sometimes we don't, and when we don't, we can, we may see our children stay up all night just to try and get that positive reinforcement in some way, shape, or form. Like I said, it's a drug. It's an addiction. And until you don't get that positive reinforcement, one who is addicted doesn't tend to want to put the phone back down until they get that dopamine hit. Those who work in big tech social companies in the Silicon Valley, they follow an unwritten rule. And it's interesting to hear about this unwritten rule. If you watch certain documentaries like The Social Dilemma, which is on Netflix, and I would advise anyone who does have Netflix, they should watch that documentary, because it is a big eye opener. It is very educational. It does tell you exactly about what the harms of social media are and what it could potentially lead us to. But big executives who were once upon a time presidents and executive directors of a certain social media platform are now saying and leaking this information that there was an unwritten rule that they all used to follow. We wouldn't get absorbed by social media too much, and we would not let our kids have any screen time. This just goes to show that they were working for a company which obviously they were very passionate about, but they weren't passionate enough to let their kids and allow their kids to use those social media platforms. And we must realize, this is something that must push us to realize the gravity of the risk that social media poses to us as humans. What is the solution? Like I said, the solution is not conclusive. The solutions, there are only some solutions that are still out there. And I think we're all in this together. We're all trying to figure out what the way around this is, because like I said, this isn't going anywhere. We need to learn to live with it, and we need to learn to regulate our lives around it. Some of the solutions which have been proposed by experts are, for example, to switch off notifications and to delete apps that are not entirely necessary. Switch off those notifications for apps that aren't necessary, and any apps that are, time wasting and time consuming, which you don't necessarily need for your work or for your livelihood, you should delete them. Then, no devices should come into the bedroom when it's time for bed. Before sleeping, everyone should put their devices outside. And if they're, extremely, sometimes work requires them to keep their device around them, then, one should have enough self-control not to look at their device or use social media before going to sleep. Because the fact is that social media is a platform where a lot of information is consumed in a very short period of time. Something which humans aren't necessarily used to. In a book, you're reading through a book, you're flicking through a book, and you're absorbing information very, steadily. With social media, what happens is you're scrolling, and you're reading headlines, you're reading opinions, you're reading views, you're conflicted yourself. Your brain is boggled. You're mind boggled basically. Now, it's essential for us to sleep, to get some healthy, to lead a healthy lifestyle, basically. If we're taking those devices to our bedrooms and before going to sleep, we're using them, that is not going to allow us to, zone out properly as we need. We're not going to get the recommended amount of sleep that we need. It's obvious why, phones shouldn't come into the bedroom before going to sleep. Then another thing, which I mentioned earlier as well, no social media for children teenagers between the ages of 16, up until the age of 16 or 18, whichever you deem appropriate. This is something I personally feel, and I'm sure, it's something which is very apparent now and very obvious, that social media shouldn't be used by children, because yes, it seems very easy to use, but the negative repercussions are so complicated that the innocent mind of a 10-year-old cannot fathom what's happening to them. They don't know anxiety like we should understand it, or not that we should have it, astaghfirullah. I mean, it's something that we should be aware of, but something 10-year-olds are not even familiar with in the slightest. And when they're struggling with not just mental health issues, but then self-harm, it's a very worrying and alarming situation. A time budget also should be imposed for children. And if you ask your children, if you ask them honestly, if they're 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, how much time do you really need in a day for social media? The likelihood is they'll give you a very honest answer, a very frank answer, and they will probably tell you something very reasonable. And so, speak to them, be at one with them, try and understand their situation as well. Allow them, if they really have to use it, although like I said, it's not advisable to give children the use of social media. But even in later years, 16, 17-year-olds, even when you're regulating their social media use, it's best to budget time. Ask them exactly how long do you need, and then assign certain times for social media use. This is just in a nutshell what I had to say, and this is something, like I said, it's very inconclusive, and I wanted to leave it open. It's a common enemy we all have in our homes, social media. It's something which comes with many goods. It's something which has come with very ugly bads and negatives as well. May Allah, the Almighty, enable us to conquer this enemy and overcome this enemy, because frankly, this is something which has already started to affect the next generation. May Allah enable the next generation to also see that social media has its harms, and may they stay away from its dangers entirely. Ameen. Jazakumullah.
Jazakallah, Qasid Moin Sahib. Thank you very much for your thought-provoking speech. And now is the time for question and answer session. And I would request Mr. Muhammad Osama to conduct this session. Please.
Jazakallah, Qaid Saab. We have collected some questions across the country, and I will ask those questions from our respected guest, Qasid Moin Saab, on today's topic. The first question is on about, somebody's asking that how long, according to you, is too long on social media?
I mean, according to me, that obviously allows me some discretion. You know, it's my personal view. So what I'm saying for this question is not necessarily the answer that is on for you know, an official answer, if you like. But I think you know, when it gets to the point where you're so consumed by social media that you're struggling to put the phone down, that means that it's already too late, and that means it's already been enough time. Social media should not just be to fill in time. It should be for a specific purpose, and you should know exactly before you pick up the phone why you're about to use it. But the moment you don't know what you're doing, that means that it's already time to put the phone down. So I think that's a very conservative answer, and I think that should, you know, summarize exactly, you know, how much we should be using social media.
Sakala. Okay. The next one is how the social media affects teenagers.
So, you know, like I said, I mentioned in my talk as well, I mean, I'm not a medical expert. I'm not entirely sure in terms of medical terms what it does. But like I said, there are multiple studies that have shown that especially teenagers, they are at a great risk of mental health issues, being exposed to mental health issues, for instance, anxiety and depression, and you know, to the extent where it's self-harm and even suicide. You know, I recall an incident I watched on the television of a young girl. I don't think she was any older than 12 or 13, and this was in America, I believe, and she was so impacted by the use of social media. Such a negative impact of social media was on her that she took a gun and she tried to kill herself. But the poor girl, she didn't do it right, and she shot off half of her face. So now she lives with, you know, for the rest of her life, she's going to live up to 80, 90 years old with a deformed sort of, you know, facial features. And that's all something which was in the spur of the moment, you know, something which was so spontaneous, or it was so time sensitive. I mean, it was limited to that time, you know, how she felt, but she considered it enough to end her life. Unfortunately, this is becoming a trend in the outer world. By the grace and blessings of Allah, this is something which doesn't affect the Ahmadi youth. But like I said, you know, it's out there. There are harms, and these are the outcomes. We should learn from the mistakes of others, and we should understand that, you know, teenagers are at risk. Children are more of a risk. We too are also at a risk. But the thing is, we're at risk of putting our children's lives in jeopardy, because our children look up to us. You see, our children see us and they see what we're doing, how much, you know, how we're active on social media. Yes, it's necessary for you to keep tabs on social media and know exactly what's happening. But what your behavior is on social media, how you behave on social media, the children are all too aware of that. You know, whether they express it or not, they know what you're doing, and they know what limits you're crossing, and they will only push those limits further. So it's best to, you know, keep those limits very, you know, close to your chest, rather than pushing those boundaries further.
Sakula. Yeah, definitely teenagers have their own boundaries. So set those boundaries by themselves can help them as well.
Yep.
The next question is from another brother. He said that is spending time on social media like sermons, dars, Islamic speeches, are they good? And how long one should spend in a day for these programs?
Watching darses and sermons.
Watching darses, sermons, Islamic speeches.
I think the thing is, children shouldn't be pushed into some intense sort of exercise. I mean, there should be moderation. If you're not listening to it at all, darses or sermons, then it's probably a good idea to switch those on every now and then and allow your children to be, in front of MTA. MTA is something that Hazur has stressed, and I think it's very obvious now that, we should be listening to MTA. MTA should be on in our homes so that children do have that connection with Khilafat, they do have that connection with the Jamaat, they do have an understanding of what their responsibility is as Ahmadis. Because there is so much influence. For instance, there's this celebrity culture now. And there are so many role models on a regular basis. We're changing, the children are changing role models. One day it will be one role model, the next week it will be another role model, and then it just keeps going on. And they're looking up to different celebrities on Instagram and seeing their their stories and their posts, and really getting inspired by the way they live, and they're trying to copy that basically, and it shows sometimes through the clothes that they're wearing, through the way that they want to appear. You can see exactly what type of celebrities they're being inspired by, and it becomes obvious. So the thing is, we need to give them a positive role model as well, in the form of Hazur, in the form of Nizam-e-Jamaat. We need to give them a positive outlook. We need to give them some form of identity. Identity is one of the biggest things that our children are struggling with, and even my own generation has struggled with, and even the generations before me has struggled with. Those of us who have migrated, especially to this country, because let's not forget. We are still, when we're talking about I say, Pakistan, of Pakistani origin. Of course, there are many other Ahmadis as well who belong to other races as well. Wherever we're from, we're a melting pot of various races, but we all collectively share this attribute of being Muslims. And whether or not, we're one race or another, we're still Ahmadi Muslims, and Ahmadi Muslims are still seen, not necessarily Ahmadi Muslims, but just Muslims in general are seen as backward people. It's important to give a purpose to our next generation, values, an identity to our next generation, so that they don't struggle to try and find their footing in life, and so that they have a strong understanding of their values, they have a strong understanding of who they are. Coming back to the question, yes, darses and sermons should be listened to. There's no specific time. How much we listen to it. We shouldn't do undue harshness to our children where we force them to sit and listen by hook or by crook. We should also come up with some form of entertaining ways of narrating incidents. Before going to sleep, if they're young children, narrate to them incidents of Islam, early Islam. Hazur has now given so much information to us of the companions of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he continues to do so. Just pick up one of those stories and just share those with your children, and narrate them in a way that excites them in the same way that other stories do. There are incidents of the life of Hazrat Masih Maud Islam. Those of you who can read Urdu, Sirat al-Mahdi is a brilliant, beautiful book that narrates incidents of the life of Hazrat Masih Maud Islam. And those, I feel, those should be shared with children, whether they can speak English or Urdu, you can translate it for them. But there is so much out there. It's not just forcing the children to watch them. You should be also making, as parents, we should be making the effort also with them. It shouldn't just be us saying, Hazrat Mirza Bashir Ahmad Sahib said something very beautiful, who was the brother of Hazrat Muslim Maud, Razillah Ta'ala anhu. He said that it should not be that we say go to namaz, it should be that we say come to namaz. We should also be going to namaz as well. You can't just say go to namaz and expect them to understand that it's important for them and not important for us. We should also be taking them. So we should be taking our children along with us on this journey of understanding who we are. There's not enough knowledge for us, never enough knowledge for us to know what our purpose is in life, and we should do everything we can to make it easier for our next generations to understand or to get an identity of their own in terms of being Ahmadi Muslims.
Jazakallah Kasa, very detailed answer, Jazakallah. Okay, the next question is slightly different. It's about the older generation, not teenagers. The question is that do you think there is a fear that the use of social media could negatively affect old people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we've just spoken on that. Yes, definitely. I I think that the topic of the speech says it for itself, the dangers of social media. So yes, definitely. 100%.
इसका ठीक है, जाकिर. Okay, the next one is that is again your opinion. That how do you say that? Please tell us how I can be safer online.
Like I said, social media shouldn't just be used as a force of habit. Where, for instance, waiting for something, we're on the train or we're waiting for a doctor's appointment and we're in the waiting room and we're just scrolling through, or before going to sleep or wherever, what have you. It shouldn't become a habit. It shouldn't just become a force of habit. I mean, I personally remember using social media for a limited period of time. When I say social media, obviously WhatsApp is included in social media as well. But WhatsApp, we all, I'm assuming we use it with the same purpose of, chatting with people we already know and not necessarily reaching out and, talking to people we don't know and sharing our views with people we don't know, and then that having an impact on us and, this going into this vicious cycle. But the thing is, I remember using platforms like Instagram and Twitter for my own personal use. And I remember feeling, I can understand, I can relate to the hollowness, the emptiness that you feel once things don't necessarily go your way. When you want to express a view and it doesn't go your way. I'm sure each and every one of us can actually, relate to this. For example, as Ahmadi Muslims, we post something about the Jamaat. And then you have anti-Ahmadi accounts, anti-Ahmadi Muslims, who then post vile and filthy abuse against, the Jamaat and our holy members of the Jamaat. So it's something that I believe, it does need some regulation for sure, definitely. But what was if you remind me, what was exactly the question?
Somebody's asking that how can I be safer online?
How can you be safer online? So I think just, keep it to people you know, and try not to post too much information of yourself out there, because that's another thing which, if you post too much information, share too much information of yourself in public, then you're putting yourself at risk for obvious reasons. Try to be. The thing is, it's important to remember that before social media came along, we all stored our photographs in photo albums at home, in the sitting room, in the living room, on a bookshelf. But all of a sudden comes social media and we share that photo album. We're not just, our dear ones on a daily basis, on for a permanent basis, but we're sharing it with people we just don't know, frankly. We're sharing photos on Twitter, on Instagram, and we're posting them with, with unlocked accounts. One thing is, yes, you should have locked accounts, only allow people to view your pictures who absolutely know you. And then secondly, you shouldn't be sharing photos between boys and girls. Photos shouldn't be shared like that. I mean, there are a number of factors. I think I touched on as well in my speech, but this is just in a nutshell, which I could, mention.
There's another question from another Ansar brother. They're asking that how long on an average person should spend on social media per day? Although you covered this bit in your speech, but if you can, please answer again.
This is quite similar to the first question. How much is too much? I believe it's too much when you don't know what you're doing and you're treading into slippery slopes. You don't know exactly what you're doing on social media. You don't have a purpose. You should know exactly what you're doing there. It shouldn't just be to pass time. To pass time, there are many, brain activity games as well that you could be playing, like Wordscapes. It's a very healthy game. You could be playing stuff like Scrabble, if you really have to be on your phone. But it's advisable to not be on the screen. There was a recent study I observed regarding children and how they see mobile phones, because they see us holding our mobile phones, our devices, and we're scrolling. But to an innocent child of 2 to 3 years of age, a 1-year-old child as well, they don't know what this is. It's an inanimate object. It's just an object that you're staring into. You're staring into space to them. Whilst you're playing with your child, when you suddenly turn to your phone for 5 minutes, to you those 5 minutes may not necessarily be that long. But to your child who wants to play with you and who you've promised time to, play with and spend some quality time with, those 5 minutes are extremely long. And those 5 minutes have a detrimental effect on their self-worth. So for the sake of your children, your young children, spend time with your children. Spend time with your family members. It's a lot more comforting. It's a lot more, you feel more wholesome. And frankly, that's what human beings are more, familiar with, rather than looking into a blank screen, into a black mirror, as it is referred to, effectively.
Exactly. Okay, the next question is only about I think the next question will cover on the mental well-being, like you discussed in your speech as well. They're asking that, does social media negatively influence the well-being? If so, how?
Mental well-being.
They're asking the general well-being, but looks like to me they're asking that how social media negatively influence the well-being. If so, how?
I mean, it can. I guess like I said, I'm not a medical expert. I'm not equipped with the knowledge to, promote that sort of information. But from a very general perspective, yes, it does have a very adverse effect on your mental health. It can have a very adverse effect on your mental health. It can make you feel low. When you start comparing yourself with others and you put your photo alongside someone else's photo, and you may not be doing it advertently, but inadvertently, it's something that does make you feel low. It's something that makes you feel, inferior. Inferiority complexes come with a lot of byproducts, unfortunately. The same goes for depression. It can lead to depression as well. Self-harm, like I said, it's an extreme, but it's not something humanity is unfamiliar with. On the news, you will see it time and again coming up where the youth are harming themselves because of social media use. It's something that does require we require a lot of educating in terms of it. I myself do, and we all do collectively. We need to understand what the harms are. But what I've told you so far, I hope I haven't mentioned anything inconclusive, but most of which I've said is conclusive, in that there have been multiple studies that suggest that social media use does have extensive social media use does have a detrimental effect on mental health.
Okay, the next question is about the platforms. Which social media platform, according to you, is the safest one?
I mean, they all have their pros and cons. If I say WhatsApp, then the only harm with WhatsApp is that, one post gets shared, which can be something medical. For example, it can be something that we should drink, for example, which can cure cancer, and that then, we blindly forward it to another 40 people, that 40 sends it to another 40, and it increases exponentially who we're sending it to, and that information gets out there. It's very likely for someone to actually follow that fake news, that fake sort of advice. So that is one harm of WhatsApp. So I don't think I can't really categorize specifically exactly what sort of social media is very safe. I think every element of social media does have its harms. That's all I can say.
Exactly. That's nicely covered. The last couple of questions are it's about the social media platforms and companies. How do they use my data? Somebody's asking that how they use my data, and what are the threats in this respect? Likewise, every social media is free nowadays, and every social media needs your personal details in there. So the question is that how social media companies use my data, and what are the threats in this respect?
I think this is also an established fact now that social media companies do have a lot more information about us than we think. And it all depends on how much we're sharing with the social media companies. If we're very, particular about what, slides we sort of allow, what sort of boxes we tick, then obviously the social media companies won't have that much information or data about you. But then again, that information, it's not entirely understood what they are able or capable of doing with that information. There were leaks, there have been leaks recently, and although it doesn't necessarily relate to social media because it's not the social media companies that are doing it, but generally, even if it's social media or not social media, there are so many elements of danger with technology, with leaks getting out there. Um, I can't necessarily say that I 100% know exactly what the harms or what the risks are that are being posed by the data that is shared with social media companies. Like I said, I think this is something which maybe perhaps Ansarullah should look into, maybe perhaps bringing someone who works for these companies. We do have Ahmadis who are working in the Silicon Valley and the USA. Perhaps they can, shed better light on this than I can. But I think that's as explicit as I can get because I'm not necessarily an expert on this subject.
Jazakallah Qasam, mashallah, covered very nicely. The last question which we received from one of the Ansar brother is that although you covered this in your speech, the question is specifically that what type of contents of social media are more harmful?
That's an interesting question. I would have liked to ask the questioner, what do you mean by content? But I guess, obviously, posting photos can have detrimental effects. Even if you put the element of parda aside, just getting comments on your looks and how you appear, especially for a girl, like I said, putting parda aside, it can have very horrible negative repercussions, and it can make them really, feel low, and can lead them to, feel anxious and have, public anxiety, social anxiety. They wouldn't want to go out in public, and it just, like I said, everything has its own harms. There isn't a greater harm of social media that I'm aware of. But pictures, and then obviously sharing information which is not accurate, and even if it is accurate, then expecting people to applaud you when in fact they won't always necessarily. That is also something that can lead to negative results. But yeah, nothing is more harmful than the other. Generally, social media, like I said, it's very uncertain exactly what elements are more harmful than others. What we do know is that there are harms. The harms, like I said, we've been discussing in this talk.
Jazakallah Qasam, that's all the questions we received from Ansar brothers. I can pass on to our Naib Guide Sahab, Mansoor Sahab, if he has any questions to ask you. Jazakallah.
Jazakumullah.
Jazakallah. Thank you very much, Kassis Sahib and Osama Said, for conducting the question answer. May Allah enable us and protect us always from the dangers of social media. Ameen. By the grace of Allah, Department of Tarbiyat Majlis Ansarullah UK has been able successfully to hold discussion on dangers of social media. I am extremely grateful to all the members who assisted me in making this program successful and express my sincere thanks and gratitude to all. May Allah reward you all immensely. Amin. We conclude this session with silent prayer. Will you please join me in silent prayer? Ameen. Jazakallah.
Jazakumullah. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum
Right,
salam.
so,